series. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. That's been a very big build-up, and the word inspiration has been used a lot, so I'm actually feeling the pressure a bit. So you will be nice with me, won't you? So my name is Tony Ryan. I'm a Pro Vice Chancellor here at the university. And I've come to talk to you about Project Sunshine. So Project Sunshine is our reaction to the problems that the world faces. I might not look it tonight, but I'm actually a bit of a tree hugger. I cycle to work every day. I try not to fly. In our home, we do all sorts of good things around recycling, because my kids often talk about saving the planet, and actually we don't need to save the planet. The planet's going to be just fine, thank you very much. The planet's going to survive whatever we do to it. What we need to do is secure the planet as a place to live. A place to live for 9 billion people. A place that 9 billion people can work, can be fed, can be kept warm. We need to save the planet for our children and our children's children without becoming extinct. And for the last decade, since I gave the Christmas lectures, that's something that's driven both my big agenda and my research agenda. So, I want to tell you about this fellow, George Porter. When I moved here 15 years ago to be Professor of Physical Chemistry, I was given an office, and I had to look at this fellow's face every morning. George Porter was a Professor of Physical Chemistry. Well, actually, he was the Professor of Physical Chemistry at the University of Sheffield. He won the Nobel Prize in 1967. He built the office I occupy. I have the same chair, the Professor of Physical Chemistry chair. And George was an inspirational character. He gave the Royal Institution Christmas lectures a couple of times. And this is his 5 billion year clock. Okay, so it comes, I've scanned it in from a book. I've tried to redraw it. And it's a bit like making a cover of someone else's song. You know, you never quite get it right. So I used George's clock. And it records the 4.5 billion years since we had this little rock that condensed around the star that was forming at the centre of our solar system. So I don't know. It's the destiny of chemistry professors to start to think about the origin of life. You know, what do you need to have life? Well, the first thing you need is you need a star that's pumping out energy, that's going to be the energy supply ultimately for that life. Because life works against the second law of thermodynamics. Once you reach equilibrium, you're dead. Because what you're doing is working against equilibrium and pumping heat out into the universe. So that's what a reductionist physical chemist thinks that life is. So this planet needs the energy so that your systems can work against decay. And the planet has to be in the Goldilocks zone. It has to be far enough from the sun, from the central star, that any water that's there doesn't boil off, and it has to be close enough to the sun that the water that's there isn't frozen and locked up as ice. So if we were a bit further away from the sun, we'd be an icy planet. Actually, the water would just sublime away. And if we were too close to the sun, the liquid water would boil off anyway. Now you need to be far enough away from the sun, but you also need to rotate. Okay? Because if you were stationary and went around the sun with the same face facing the sun all the time, there'd be a light side and a dark side. And all the water would boil away from the light side, and the ice that was on the dark side, that water would creep round to the front and that would boil away too. So you have to be spinning round. So you need to fulfill all these criteria to even start the first part of this clock. And the first part of this clock are interesting molecules. So you have a crusty, you have a rocky planet, there's water, there's crusty pools, there's interesting molecules kind of floating around. Some of them start to make copies of themselves. The water ebbs and flows, the molecules get broken up. Eventually, you get cells. They start to have chemical systems that collect energy. Because to have life, you need to consume energy constantly. So this process initially uses things that are lying around. It might use hydrogen sulfide, it might use ammonia. And then eventually these objects, these kind of protocells, the start of life, starts to become bacteria. You get a membrane. And the membrane allows you to pass energy inside and out. And then eventually these organisms start to, rather than scavenge, they start to use rather than scavenge energy from around them, they start to use the energy from the sun to develop a kind of chemistry that means that they can get more and more complex. And then one organism starts photosynthesis, starts to use the energy from the sun to drive the chemical reactions. And that form of photosynthesis has a waste product called oxygen. And after 2 billion years of life on Earth, our atmosphere transformed from essentially being reducing, so it was full of ammonia, methane, carbon monoxide, lots of carbon dioxide, to organisms that took those compounds out of the air into the sea and then into their bodies, and their waste product, their metabolism, had a waste product called oxygen. And that oxygen transformed the planet, took our atmosphere from being something that was very corrosive to organic forms of life to something that would support organic forms of life. Now, all of this happened in the sea. Plants, bugs, animals, all in the sea. All the geology, all the fossils, everything happening in the sea. Nothing on the land. And it was the plants that colonised the land, and the animals came onto the land following the plants. The plants created the beautiful planet we now recognise. And according to my dear friend Sir David Reed, Professor of Botany, the animals have been screwing it up ever since. And we are the top animal. And we're screwing it up more than anybody else. And that's what I'm here to tell you about. So actually, for me, this story started with my predecessor, Lord George Porter. So basically, to a reductionist like me, there are only two reactions that are important on the planet. The first one takes place in chlorophylls, and this is the reaction that takes sunshine, light, and carbon dioxide and water to make sugars and liberates oxygen. Then all other life, okay, and I am speaking very generally, so there will be 1 in a billion organisms that doesn't work this way. But essentially all other life depends fundamentally on these sugars. And plants use sugars, and animals use sugars to drive the citric acid cycle. And that gives energy to all their other processes. And this molecule, adenosine triphosphate, is essentially the fuel. Interestingly, so the other day, I saw this car broken down. It had run out of fuel. Its number plate was T74 ADP. I said to the guy, well, I'm entirely surprising your car's run out of fuel. It's all adenosine diphosphate. Right? You can't work on adenosine diphosphate. You need to convert it into adenosine triphosphate to make it work. And the light reacts, essentially uses, this is a vector. So the ATP is a vector. You turn over kilograms of ATP every day. In fact, you turn over nearly your body weight of ATP. Because everything you do uses a molecule of ATP. Every muscle firing, every nerve, they all use a molecule of ATP. And you have to take light, carbon dioxide to make sugar, and this happens in plant and algae, and this Krebs cycle reaction, again, named after a Sheffield University Nobel Prize winner, this Krebs cycle reaction that takes place in the mitochondria, this is the powerhouse of the body. It burns the sugar fuel and creates the energy vector. Okay? If we were talking about an economy, we'd be burning oil and making electricity, and then everything we use. So there are parallels between the molecular life and our big global scale energy life. You have fuel, which is sugar made from the energy from the sun, and a vector, ATP. This is it. These two reactions. Plants do this one. Plants and animals do this one. And for animals to do this one, they need to eat these. Or other animals. So, how do we get from, so a quick canter through evolution. So, Porter's got us to life on land, right? We are literally a blink of the eye. So, according to Chris Stringer, human beings are about 150,000 years old. So you know about Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons, Homo sapiens, and there's about 10,000 times too many of us. Right? If we were another primate, there might be 500,000 human beings. There'd be as many as there are chimpanzees or bonobos. Because chimpanzees and bonobos live at the limit of food supply. And they're very restricted in their range. They can't live very far away from the equator. Now, other primates have evolved to inhabit other niches. But this primate did a load of different things. Thumbs. Opposable thumbs. Actually, that evolution started again with texting, right, after kind of lying dormant for 150 years, 1,000 years. So opposable thumbs allowed tool making. Tool making allowed us to start cooking, because we overcame our fear of fire. And when we started cooking, that meant we needed less guts. You need less stomach to digest cooked food. That's why you cook it. Okay? So now you need to put less energy into digesting your food. You need to spend less time finding food because you need to eat less volume because you've done the processing outside the body using these clever tools and fire. And then you can become cleverer because you have energy to invest in your brain. So human beings stopped being primates and started being humans when they started to use tools, when they started to cook, and when they started to talk to each other, when they developed language. And all of these things allowed us to dominate the planet. But these people And these people lived in a fundamentally different world. So these Stone Age people and these Victorians, right, they wouldn't recognise our life particularly, in the same way that they wouldn't recognise their life. And the difference that happened between the cavemen and the Victorians was these people depended on the sun and on the seasons for everything, and this group of people had broke the link with sunshine. They discovered buried sunshine, fossilised sunshine, energy that had been stored away under the ground billions of years previously. So 400 years ago, we still lived on sunshine. 400 years ago, there were less than 1 billion people on the planet. The majority of them had a subsistence diet and lived on the limit of food supply. The population ebbed and flowed with the food supply. Drought, loss of harvest, famine, less people. We've used coal and oil to escape that. So in this period, as Europe was entering the Industrial Revolution, Southeast Asia was then and is now the most heavily populated and the most fecund land on the face of the earth. More people could be supported per hectare in Southeast Asia because of where it is and how it was farmed than anywhere else. But 400 years ago, there was no coal, no oil, no gas. But now we have 7 billion people. The 7th billion person was born a little over a year ago. Now we're eating fossilised sunshine. So here's a graph from 1750 to 2150 of the Earth's population. Prior to 1750, the population was doubling every 1,000 years or so. It might be 10,000 years, coming down slowly, because this is almost an exponential growth as technology moves. The genetic record shows that at one point, there was a bottleneck in our population when there were only 70,000 breeding pairs of humans. 70,000 human beings on the face of the earth 100,000 years ago. They could have all fit into the stadium where Chelsea drew last night. All of them, the whole of the Earth's population, could have watched the football game. Yeah, and I do think football's that banal, actually. So, as the Industrial Revolution started, and the Industrial Revolution started here in England, in the north of England, the Earth's population started to grow. The technology that was developed here diffused all over the world. Why did the Industrial Revolution start in England? In 1750, more energy was taken into London in the form of coal than in the form of wood. And that's the tipping point. Right? And the reason was that wages were high in England. The labour cost was high. The labour cost's high, then you can afford to invest in research and development to reduce your labour cost. So we developed this buried sunshine into the technologies of the steam engine, heating houses. That went all over the world and the population started to grow. And if you were a scientist or a businessman 100 years ago, the thing you were concerned about, as we are now, was food security. All the land was being used. Between 1700 and 1800, the UK's population increased by a factor of 4.5. How did the UK cope with that? It put 5 times more land under the plough. Where was that land? Not in the UK. It was in the colonies. And our population explosion occurred here. And we felt food security because we were already farming 5 times as much land to feed this island as we had on the island. In 1908, Fritz Haber worked out how to take nitrogen from the air and convert it into ammonia. Victorian farmers knew that you needed nitrogen and phosphorus to make plants grow. In 19th century England, not a turd was wasted. Every piece of poo was picked up to be used on the fields. And it was a not so honourable profession, but it was something that employed lots of people, night soilmen, collecting fertiliser from the cities. Haber and Bosch freed us from that. And it was a big issue because we'd already dug up all the buried bat poo in South America. All that nitrate had already been shipped to Europe and the US to be spread on the fields. And Haber and Bosch invented this process that made fertiliser. And just in case, and you need to burn lots of coal to make hydrogen, and then the hydrogen reacts with the nitrogen to make ammonia. And it needs energy, okay? And what happened was, once you had fertiliser, you could increase the fertility of the ground. You could get crop yields to increase by a factor of 10. You needed less land to feed more people. There's more food, there's more people. So the population started to grow, and it started to double every 25 years. And in fact, the curve has only just turned over. So it's still doubling on that 25-year period, and it's only just started to slow down. And just in case you've not worked out why we're eating coal and oil, this graph is the Earth's population in billions, and the red graph is our consumption of oil. They lie on top of each other. Prince Charles might come along and say, well, it's very well, you know, we just need to change our farming methods. We can all become organic. Do organic farming. No need for this terrible fertiliser stuff. Quick tug of the cufflinks. 2/3 of the Earth's population depend existentially on fertiliser for their food. If we turned off the fertiliser factories and all farming was organic, we'd be able to feed 2 billion people. 2 billion people would be eating grains and pulses. 5 billion people would die of starvation. Go on then. Who's going to pick those 5 billion people? So, you're not inspired now, are you? Aren't you frightened to death now? There's 7 billion people on the earth. There's 1 billion crazy consumers. That's us. There are 3 billion trying to catch up in Brazil, India, China. And we need to give them a fair deal. We need to consume more. No. We need to spend more and consume less, so we can pay them for the resources that we're taking from their country. Not the net present value, but the true value. So we need to consume less and pay more, so that these people can catch us up, so we have a fairer world. And at the moment, we're burning through the buried sunshine at the rate of 10 million years per year. So the energy we burn every year is the total energy that was laid down by photosynthesis over 10 million years. You don't have to be much of a mathematician to work out that you can't do that for very long. So, why Project Sunshine? Well, the world's in crisis, a long-term crisis. Too many people, not enough energy or food, unsustainable economic growth, climate change, unsustainable economic growth. What does that mean? I went on a trip a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't packed very carefully. No undies. No problem. Go to Tesco's, 3 pairs of undies, £2. cheaper to buy a new pair of undies and chuck them away than it is to get a pair of undies washed. That's not sustainable. It's deeply not sustainable. And we know that the way we live and the rate at which we throw things away, it's not sustainable. And it's that unsustainable living that's driving climate change, because we're putting all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we need to deal with energy security. And in the medium term, we have enough coal, we have enough oil, and Obama was re-elected today, and he's going to continue fracking gas. But fracking more gas is not the answer. We need to work on renewables, and we need to work on them now. And we need to work on nuclear power, and we need to work on it now. And at the University of Sheffield, we work on all of these things in our science and engineering departments. And we also work on the supply chain in management and economics. In the long term, we need to do solar power. We need to collect the energy of the sun and transform it directly into that energy vector, electricity. But like Gerald Ford said, solar power, it ain't going to happen overnight. Thank you. So we need to solve the intermittency problem. We need to think about grid storage and what energy vectors are. And we have people at the University of Sheffield who are working on those things. And in terms of food security, we need to do the fundamental science on new crops. And we need to do the fundamental science on new farming methods. Because what we do know is we can't continue farming the way we farm now, because in 20 years' time there won't be any soil left. The way we currently farm is degrading the soil. Because the soil was developed over that billion years of plant life and has microbes that are connected in dense networks. And plants that are not cultivated know how to exploit those networks, but the plants that we've developed to feed ourselves really don't. So now for the good bit. Now I'm going to tell you what we're doing to solve these problems and why we're doing it. So photovoltaics, that's solar cells. It takes energy directly from the sun and transforms it into electricity. And there's more than enough energy reaches us from the sun. If we could capture 1 hour of the sunlight falling on the earth, we'd be able to power the world's economy for 1 year. Just 1 hour of collection of energy would give humankind all the energy it needed for a year. The problem is, how do we do it? So first you have to collect the energy, and then you have to think about how you might store it, or how you might get it from place to place. The calculation for the USA says you only have to cover this small area of Nevada in solar cells. So if this little yellow box was a 10% efficient solar cell, it would collect enough energy for the whole of the American economy. Now if you spread those solar cells over every roof and building at 10% efficiency, on the existing buildings you'd be able to produce half the power that the US needs. The calculation for the UK, because we're a bit more densely populated and a little less energy hungry, is 1/3 of our energy requirements. Why? Because the weather's crap here. Right? It's covered in clouds. But on the top of our physics department, we have a solar farm. And the solar farm takes photovoltaic devices made elsewhere and made in Sheffield, measures their efficiency in real-world conditions with a light detector that measures the insolation, the amount of energy coming from the sun at any one time, and those measurements are linked to geographical information systems, and we know what the weather is. So we know what the cloud cover is. And we have systems where we can guide investors as to what's the right technology to invest in for a given location. In fact, I've turned my phone off, but the applied mathematicians and the physicists have developed an iPhone app. You put your phone down, tell it which solar panel you're thinking of buying, it will tell you what direction to point it in and how much energy you could expect to get in a given year. Local, but also global, because we need those kinds of solutions for the whole world. I absolutely think to get us through the hump, because we don't have enough solar energy technology, we're going to need to build more nuclear power stations. To solve the global energy need at the moment, we'd need to build a gigawatt power station, nuclear power station, every 3 days forever. Because by the time you'd finish building enough of them, the ones that you built at the beginning will be decommissioned. So doing nuclear just puts us on a treadmill. We need to learn how to use the ultimate fusion reactor. And the ultimate fusion reactor is 93 million miles away, and it's called the Sun. It has 1,000 times more energy landing on us than we currently use. So my message is a really cheesy movie. It's called Back to the Future. We need to go back to living on sunshine, and living on sunshine in real time. And to do so, we need to understand photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis changed the surface, changed the earth. Photosynthesis made the soil. It allowed the plants to evolve, it allowed the human beings to evolve. But we didn't really know quite what it was doing in terms of the homeostasis of our atmosphere. So, in the cells, in the oceans, there are these bugs, these blue-green algae called chlorococcus. And there are 10 to the 5 of them. Right? There's 100,000 cells per milliliter of seawater. Just one kind of organism. There are many other organisms as well. So that means there's 10 to the power 28 cells on the Earth at any one time in the sea. They turn over, i.e. they make themselves again every day and a half. That's 10 to the power 30 cells a year. And that's 10 to the 11 tons of organism. Right? That's 1,000 times more of these bugs in terms of mass than there are human beings. That's why I say the planet will be fine. Right? If there's 1,000 times more mass of one single-celled organism than there is of us, why are we managing to screw the planet up so much? Why are we acidifying the ocean so they can no longer live and provide us with our oxygen? So we need to deeply understand this photosynthesis process. Unfortunately, we have great people in molecular biology and in chemistry who are doing that. Neil Hunter, world expert on where the photosynthetic organelle, the chlorophyll, sits in the membrane and how it works. And working with colleagues in chemistry and physics, understanding how to connect those organelles together to make more efficient photosynthesis. In terms of food security, well, this is a real issue. So there's 7 billion people now, there could be 9 billion people by 2050. There's 1 billion people who are chronically undernourished. But we throw away 40% of the food we produce worldwide. These people aren't undernourished because of a lack of food. They're undernourished because of a lack of money and because of a lack of our will to feed them. 180 million children are severely underweight. 400 million women are anemic. And this is the most frightening thing. In Africa, per capita food intake, i.e. the calories that go in, is 20% less than it was in 1960. Average crop yields are a tonne per hectare, the same as we had in the UK in 2,000 years ago. Because their agriculture's wrong, because it's provided by large multinational farming organisations. Now, per capita food intake being 20% less now than it was in 1960, if that was the UK or the USA, that'd be a great story, right? The health benefits would be enormous. There wouldn't be an obesity epidemic. But in Africa, it's a disaster. People are starving to death. And as the 3 billion who are trying to catch us up want to eat more protein, that means eating more meat, that means feeding more grain to animals, this problem's only going to get worse. So, what are we doing about it? Well, we understand photosynthesis at the molecular level, we know how to breed plants, and we're understanding how to change farming. Changing farming to feed 9 billion people really is going to need genetically modified organisms. It's going to need GM food. And what GM food does, it allows you to stop ploughing. And if you don't need to plough, you don't lose the soil. If a Martian came down and looked at us, yeah, someone came down and we already know that there's more non-human cells in this body than there are human cells in terms of number, your gut flora, okay? If you come down and look at the Earth, you'd say, well, the Earth's populated by these plants called cereals, and they've trained these perambulating organisms to look after them and provide them with food, because that's what we do. So we need to learn how to do cereals, and again, in animal and plant sciences, there are people looking at transforming the productivity of rice by giving it what's called C4 photosynthesis rather than C3 photosynthesis. And that will allow us to make more food with less water, less pesticide, less herbicide, and in Southeast Asia, get 4 crops per year instead of 3. And often, we don't even think about our food. This calculation came from an example, a homework question given to physics students in a project in their first year. What's the energy content of a cup of tea? So they went away and calculated how much energy it took to grow the tea, make the paper for the tea bag, grow the sugar, make the milk, manufacture the tea bag, put it in a box, transport everything either by sea from where the tea was grown or by road once it had been transformed into tea bags and sugar and milk here. I'm a chemistry professor, so I was asked at the beginning of the homework to guess what the answer would be. And I guessed that 80% of the energy making a cup of tea was boiling the water. And I'd have been right if it was black tea. But if it's a cup of tea, milk and 1 sugar, 44% boiling the water, 20% the tea and the sugar, and 36% of the energy in a 200ml cup of tea with 10 millilitres of milk is the 10 millilitres of milk. 36% of the energy in a cup of tea is that splash of milk. Why? Because dairy is really energy intensive. You have to feed the cows. Often you have to keep them inside. That's where that energy cost comes from. And dairy, why do we have dairy? We have dairy because it makes butter. And butter is the most energy dense food we have. It's 80% fat. It's actually got a higher calorific value than coal. And it means it's easy to transport. And dairy was an early part of trade. And as we've evolved, we've become lactose tolerant, whereas we're naturally lactose intolerant, because only babies can deal with lactose. Naturally, we've learned to keep the genes to deal with lactose. And we've developed a culture that has dairy. So, if you really want to be kind to the environment, become a vegan and make your last meat meal your pets. Now, the reason I say that is we're causing big problems because of the way we live. And at the University of Sheffield, we're starting to integrate across science. In maths, we have people who understand how the sun works. In physics, we have people who know how to collect the sun's energy and turn it into electricity. In chemistry, we have people who make the molecules that collect that photon. In molecular biology, we have people who understand how that photon goes through chlorophyll and produces an electron. And also, in molecular biology, we have people who understand how plants work, what plant physiology is. And they work with the botany folks to understand whole plants. Now, we've made photosynthesis more efficient, but we can't sort out the plumbing yet. We can't do the physiology to take full advantage of this photosynthesis. And those people who are taking full advantage of photosynthesis work on a global ecology scale. And in animal and plant sciences, there are people who understand how carbon and nitrogen cycles through the earth. And to do that, they use mathematical models. And we're back in maths. We've gone all the way around our science. And in fact, this project's so important to science that we've started to invest in Project Sunshine in psychology. We've appointed a lecturer whose research is about understanding risk perception in terms of food and energy security. And actually, cancer. The reason we have cancer is because gene repair fails. And the reason we need gene repair is because our DNA is damaged. And the principal cause of DNA damage is ultraviolet light coming from the sun. So all of these things are related to the sun. And that's why we brought our sunshine research together. So we want to solve this global food energy cycle. And the last thing I'm going to tell you, I have an interactive whiteboard in my office. Right? So we had a group together and we were talking about relieving this energy and food pressure. And we need solar technology and we need novel food systems. So here's a scientist solution to the problem. So we burn biomass or coal, yeah, because that's just old biomass, to generate heat and carbon dioxide. And then we use the heat to make electricity and then we use all that further down. Okay? But we could use solar to split water and make hydrogen. Yeah? So then you could combine the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen to make methanol, and methanol's a liquid fuel. And then you could use that liquid fuel in all our current fuel infrastructure. You don't need to make big changes to cars to make them work. And now, we've used carbon twice. First we use it to generate electricity, and then we can use it again locally. So that would immediately halve the carbon intensity of our energy infrastructure. Now, it's written down as using light to split the water and using biomass to generate the carbon dioxide. But we could do this today. Because actually, we could build a nuclear power station to split the water and a coal power station to generate the electricity and make the carbon dioxide. Then to make it really efficient, you'd build a nuclear power station next to a coal-fired power station. You get two sources of electricity and a liquid fuel and emit no carbon. To me, that's a no-brainer. How do you imagine that would go down if we wanted to build a nuclear power station and a coal-fired power station just outside Sheffield? Or even close to the Daily Mail? It's not going to be good. And here's the rub. And this is why being at a university is important. Because we have clever people. We have clever people who can dream up technical solutions to almost any problem. But that's actually not so important. What's important is, are they socially and economically acceptable? And can we make systems that will work in our current political economy, or do we need a new political economy? And that's why we have the Sheffield Research Centre for the Political Economy, to bring all of these things together. Because I have folks in the Faculty of Science who can design a plan for a changing global climate. Because we can recreate any climate that exists now and potential future climates in the underneath the car park outside the Arts Tower. It's actually our most energy-intensive research. So we can make plants that will work in varying atmospheric conditions. We can model what they'll do to the climate and how productive they are, and design future crops for future climates. But the question is, will it be acceptable to you, your children, and your children's children? And that's why we have to discover and understand. Thank you.